Calvin is in prison, exercising in his cell. Fellow inmates respect him, and it's his release day. As he walks toward freedom, they envy his departure. The gates open, revealing a large shadow. But Calvin is actually small despite the reputation. Percy arrives, accidentally bumps him with a car door. Percy mentions a $100,000 job, shocking Calvin, wondering what it is. Percy reveals a plan to steal a jewel, and then they will stop stealing to settle down. Meanwhile, Vanessa and Daryl face financial issues. Daryl proposes with a ring without a jewel. Vanessa, newly promoted, says they must delay having kids due to her job. Percy and Calvin head to the jewelry store. Percy pulls out his gun in the middle of the street crowd, getting ready to break into the store. But Calvin slaps him to calm his enthusiasm. They plan the heist on the jewels. Percy walks into the store with a large bag that hides Calvin. Calvin sneaks in the bag towards the jewelry display. Meanwhile, Percy distracts the clerk. Calvin begins to saw the cabinet from below to steal the gem. However, a dog enters the display case, climbing into the bag with Calvin. Startled, Calvin stays with the dog inside. Percy lifts the bag and heads out. Suddenly, the dog barks, alerting the owner, who calls security, thinking Percy stole her dog. The clerk then notices the gem is missing. Percy exits the store with a bag, undetected, and gets into the car. Calvin emerges, tosses the dog from the window. Its owner catches it. Percy finds the car clamped for a parking violation, and the police arrive due to an employee's report. Percy, spotting them, flees, forgetting Calvin. He returns, realizing Calvin's inability to run fast due to his small legs. The police inquire about the thieves' appearance. The dog's owner suspects those who took her black skin color. Calvin and Percy escape, entering a supermarket, pursued by police. Daryl and Vanessa are there, arguing about delaying children. Calvin hides the jewel in Vanessa's bag, avoiding police capture. The police mistakenly arrest an innocent black man, later releasing him. Vanessa leaves with her fiancé, and Calvin and Percy follow to retrieve the jewel, overhearing them at home discussing postponement. The child eyes Vanessa's bag with the jewel. He tells Percy to act as if he's a child, then leave without suspicion. Calvin isn't keen on it, but Percy insists, dressing him as a baby. He places Calvin at Vanessa's door, rings the bell, and hides. A passing dog urinates on Calvin. Daryl and his fiancée find him, and Calvin, engrossed in his act, speaks like a child. They read a note with Calvin saying his parents can't care for him. Percy made many spelling errors in his note. They bring Calvin inside, and Vanessa is bothered by the dog's smell on him. They change his diaper. Calvin winks at Vanessa, making her uneasy. She calls the child care center, which is closed until Monday due to the holiday. Vanessa's father suggests returning Calvin to where they found him, but Vanessa wants to contact the police. When Calvin hears police, he starts crying and coughing like an adult, worrying Vanessa about his health. She takes him to the doctor, who discovers a knife wound and a tattoo, leading them to suspect Calvin's family. After the checkup, the doctor assures them Calvin is fine, so Vanessa dresses him. They decide to return him later, as they believe his family harms him. They plan to keep him until the center opens on Monday. While discussing, Calvin takes a bag and rushes in the hospital. A policeman notices and catches the child, looking for his parents. Daryl and his fiancée follow and want to explain the situation. Calvin quickly improvises, calls Vanessa Mama, and she, moved, takes him. Meanwhile, a gangster named Mr. W has tasked Percy with stealing jewels. Percy is threatened to return the jewels soon or face death, making him anxious and promising to handle it. At home, Vanessa invites friends to see the baby. They're puzzled by his look and behavior, unsure of what to say. One greets the baby, and Calvin grips his hand tightly in anger, causing pain. Another teases the baby's nose, and Calvin retaliates by breaking it. Vanessa then takes Calvin to the kitchen to meet more friends, showing interest in one, who holds him on her lap. Calvin feels embarrassed around her, unaware she doesn't know. Vanessa attempts to bathe the child, planning to join him, but Daryl surprisingly takes Calvin's place, leaving Calvin unfairly accused with a man bothering him in the bath. At night, Calvin searches for the bag and jewel, daringly confronts Percy, but Vanessa's father interrupts with a gun, mistaking him for a thief. Daryl intervenes, saving Calvin, calling him just a baby. Daryl takes him to the kitchen for milk, expresses his desire to be a good father, and never neglect Calvin, who he sees as a son. Calvin, touched by Daryl's words, forgets his mission and embraces his role. The following day, Vanessa recalls the memorable night to Daryl. Remember, Daryl is puzzled because he thinks he stayed away from her all night and doesn't know what happened. Calvin is revealed to have slept next to him and is the one involved with him. Vanessa then makes breakfast, preparing baby food for Calvin. Calvin sees it, refuses, and steals Vanessa's father's food. Vanessa is surprised her father ate so fast. He tells her the child consumed it, but she laughs in disbelief. She leaves for work, instructing Daryl to watch the child. Daryl takes him to the amusement park, where the child plays aggressively, causing Daryl harm. Daryl buys ice cream for Calvin and his friends' kids. Spears, spying on them, talks to Calvin about the jewel supposedly in the bag. Calvin says it's in one of 3 similar bags, adding to the confusion. Percy, Daryl's friend, notices and mistakes the situation, thinking Calvin is being kidnapped, all while Percy observes their approach. So he escapes and grabs a random bag from the 3. Then Daryl appears, checks on the child, and thanks God the child is unharmed. Calvin is affected by what's happening and feels guilty. Later, Percy reaches Mr. W with the bag and tells him the jewel is inside. Mr. W empties the bag to find nothing but dirty diapers and children's toys. He gets angry and orders his men to tie Percy up, giving him one last chance to get the jewel or the patients will really kill him. Percy runs in fear, leaving the place to complete his mission. Mr. W orders his men to follow Percy and kill him once he gets the jewel. Meanwhile, Daryl is with the child watching a hockey game, giving Calvin the chance to take the jewel out of the bag, and he puts it. Daryl notices something in Calvin's mouth and asks him to open it. Calvin accidentally swallows a jewel, so when he opens his mouth, it appears empty. Angered by the incident, Calvin throws a drink at a hockey player. The player, upset, demands to know who did it. The crowd points to Daryl, prompting the player to hit him. Calvin, caring for Daryl, retaliates against the player. Unfortunately, the player attacks Calvin, making him unconscious. Daryl takes Calvin home, where he nurses the bruised kid and explains to Vanessa that he feels unprepared for fatherhood. The following day, Daryl and his fiancée organize Calvin's birthday party. During the event, Vanessa's father sees news about Calvin is accused of a major theft, but he feels touched by being the center of attention at the party and having a supportive family. Vanessa's dad shows up with a teddy bear, hiding something inside. Percy arrives, claiming to be Calvin's dad, wanting to take him. Daryl, angry, refuses and hits Percy with a trash can lid. Mr. W's men see this and mistakenly think Daryl is involved with Percy in the theft. Calvin's stomach hurts from swallowing the jewel, so he drinks oil to help pass it. He ends up with diarrhea, and Vanessa changes him, finding the jewel in his diaper. She mistakenly thinks Daryl replaced the missing jewel in the ring. They later head to the Grammy site together. During the jewel event, Vanessa's father looks after the child. Alone, he confronts Calvin, exposing his true identity. Calvin fights back and calls Percy for a quick escape. Daryl and Vanessa return, shocked to find her father seemingly attacking Calvin. Mistaking him for insane, they admit him to a mental institution. That evening, Vanessa puts the child to bed, while Daryl discovers a hidden camera in the child's teddy bear. Upon watching the recording, he realizes Calvin's deception. He rushes to Vanessa, only to learn Calvin has escaped with the jewel. Vanessa, stunned by the sequence of events, revisits her father, while Daryl reports the theft to authorities. Meanwhile, Calvin's joy is evident as he draws in the getaway car, celebrating their successful plot. He tells Pierce that Mr. W thinks Daryl was involved in the robbery, so they don't need to return the jewel or frame Daryl. However, Calvin fears for Daryl, gets upset, kicks Pierce out of the car, and heads to Daryl's place. Meanwhile, Mr. W and his men confront Daryl, demanding the jewel. When he denies having it, they beat him. Calvin sneaks in pretending to be a child. Mr. W asks whose child he is, and Daryl claims him as his son. They take the child to a room to prevent him from seeing anything. Inside, Calvin knocks one man out, uses toys to subdue another. and then finds Mr. W playing with the child. On the plane, W brandishes a gun at the child, instructing him to leave. The child reacts by throwing a word, which boomerangs back, knocking W down. The gun and warns Mr. W to stay still. The police arrive and arrest Mr. W. Calvin tries to flee, but an officer mistakenly thinks he's Daryl's son and takes him back. Daryl ensures Calvin returns the jewel, leading to a $100,000 reward for Daryl's help in capturing the thief. Daryl candidly tells Calvin how being his father temporarily brought him joy. Calvin cries, expressing happiness about having a father. He dresses to leave but hesitates, not wanting to go. Daryl empathizes, saying they'll remain friends. 9 months later, Vanessa gives birth, and the baby plays with the grandfather. Calvin entertains the child, noticing their resemblance, hinting at the bond he formed with Vanessa.